Please stand. My brothers and sisters, we listen attentively to the good news that has been recorded for us by Luke. Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha, burdened with much serving, came to Jesus and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me here to do all of the serving? Tell her to get up and help me." The Lord said to her in reply, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and you are worried about many things. There is need of only one. Mary has chosen the better part, and it shall not be taken away from her." The gospel of Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ. Please be seated. I absolutely love having people over to the house. I love going out to dinners. I love sitting around a table, having a good meal with just friends. I live for that stuff. When people come over for weekends, my wife Donna, she calls it my play dates. You know, that I have my play dates coming over, and I'll be entertained for a couple of days, which means she could get a rest and a break, you know? But I love it. But it is work. When people come over, there's a responsibility. You got to make sure that, you have enough food. You got to make sure you time out exactly how and when the food comes out. So you don't want anyone talking about you when they leave, You don't want anyone saying, "Wow, really? Only a case of beer? We ran out? Like, how terrible," right? You don't want anyone talking about you. And you want to make sure you feed them well, because when you feed them well, everyone goes, "Wow, that Eric and Donna, wow, they're great guys. Wow, wonderful." And then they try to book for the next year so that they could come back and visit you again. Now, hospitality for us, this is the way this works. Whenever we have people over, this is the activity that we all go through. We all do it. We all want to make sure that the people who are coming are comfortable and that they're properly prepared for. This vision of things is minimal to Mediterranean hospitality in Jesus' day. And a lot of that still exists even to this day in current time. It was clearly understood that if someone was to enter your house, they ultimately became the guest of honor. Every whim, every desire, anything that they wanted was provided for them. Not to do so not only meant that the person could leave and talk about you, but it was a lack and a loss of honor. The honor of the family, the honor of the owner of the house, loses that honor by not providing the best in hospitality for a guest. Now, the way we know that this is Martha's house is because Martha is the one running around preparing everything and serving. It is the woman of the house in which the guests are in. That woman has the responsibility to make sure that everything is taken care of. This is cultural. It's the way it is. Honestly, a lot of it in the Mediterranean world is still very much like this. It is that woman's responsibility. So we know, because Martha is the one running around serving, we know that this is Martha's house. Now, Martha's sister happens to be there. Now, Martha's sister doesn't have any responsibilities here. Why? Not her house. So she is sitting, and she is listening to Jesus. I don't want to skip over that part, and we take it for granted, and we move very quickly. A lot of people don't like preaching about this because it turns some people off, and some institutions that are structured as such, it really challenges them. If there is a rabbi, and the rabbi is teaching, their students sit at their feet as they're being taught. Most all of the students of the rabbis of the time are male. They're all men. There are no female students. They don't exist. They're not permitted. It's cultural. It's religious. They are boxed and they are locked out. Luke is pointing out that Jesus accepts female disciples, female students. And this woman sitting at the feet of Jesus, everyone else in that room would have recognized that she has taken the position of a student to a rabbi, and she doesn't belong there. Part of Martha's concern about Mary is exactly this. See, Martha thinks that Mary isn't doing anything valuable because she's a woman and she shouldn't be listening to the rabbi anyway. She shouldn't be positioned there, so she should make herself useful and help me serve. It's all part of the culture. It's all ingrained. And so when she's telling her, it's not like, me telling my wife or my wife telling me or you telling your sister or your brother, to help me take the garbage out. It's not like that at all. It's simply that Martha does not value that Mary is in a position that she is opening herself to listening to Jesus, and Jesus is accepting her as a disciple. Now, the reason I say a lot of people don't like talking about this is because within certain churches, you're not allowed to have female leadership. There are no female ordained ministers. There is no female authority at all. And they state that the reason for this is because Jesus had only 12 disciples, and by the way, they were all men. It's not true. It's just scripturally not true. They pick and choose what they want to protect whatever infrastructure and constructs that they want. But the fact of the matter is, we have a story here where this woman, Mary, is a disciple of the rabbi Jesus at his feet, and Jesus is not pushing back. He is accepting it, which makes Jesus incredibly radical for his time, and everyone in that room would have sat there and said to themselves, what is he doing? She should, this isn't her place. This isn't where she belongs. And when Martha comes out and says, look at all the work I'm doing. All of you people came into my house. Why don't you tell her to get up and help me? And Jesus points out the reality that she is a disciple and she has chosen well, and it will not be denied her. And he accepts her as that. And for you and I, we have to accept the scriptures and the stories for what they are. We have to accept this experience for what it is. And the reality of the experience is that Jesus is very radical. He does not see things or judge things the way everyone else does. And so, poor Martha, gets sort of put in her place. You are anxious and worried about many things. Tell me, when you hear that in the scriptures, there's not a part of you that shivers a little bit because it's like he's talking to me. We do the same thing. We have the same concerns and worries. We look at things a very specific way, most of which has been indoctrinated into us by our culture, by our society, by our families. Jesus is challenging Martha in the various way he's challenging us today to look at how we see things and to make a different determination based on how Jesus sees things. If we are meant to be disciples of Jesus Christ, then doesn't it simply imply in the term disciple that we should be following the thoughts and the actions of the one that we are following, the Master? And Jesus is challenging Martha You are anxious and worried about many things because society says that you are in charge of hospitality, that you have to make sure that everything is said and done, that somehow you're going to lose your honor if you don't treat me properly. And what you're missing is the very fact, the very sense, the very essence that I am here. I am here with you. You are busy and your head is clouded with all this other stuff that everyone else has told you and taught you, and culture and society has drilled into you, and you're missing the point that I am here. And Mary sees and knows that I am here, and she has positioned herself into a place of submission, which all rabbis, students would, to absorb what it is that the rabbi is saying. And so Jesus is challenging Martha. Stop. Think differently. Look at this differently. Perhaps that is your responsibility if I was not the one sitting in your midst, but I am. And you're not recognizing that. You're too busy fulfilling obligations other people have told you you need to fulfill. You're not paying attention to the fact that it is the Lord, the Messiah, sitting here in your house, who doesn't care whether or not you brought me the olives or the bread or that you've had enough. I'm here. There's also a challenge in here, I think, which is very practical for us, that takes it out of a cultural context into our present day. Jesus is not saying that Martha is wrong, and he's definitely not saying that Mary is wrong. So if they're not both wrong, then Jesus must be implying that there must be a balance between work and prayer. So a lot of times we think to ourselves, if I could just sit around and pray all day, my life would be perfect. Or that's what my life should look like. I don't need to work. I should just be able to relax and to pray, and that would be the fulfillment. And then on the other side, it's kind of like, well, all I do is work. And all I do is have this responsibility. I have to run around and do all this stuff. I have all these things that I have to fulfill. I have all these people who I'm responsible for. And so we end up, most of the time, you and I get stuck in one direction or another. And what I think Jesus points out here is that the balance for us, as it was for Jesus, is both. Recognize in the scriptures how many times Jesus is actively teaching and ministering, right? And then what do the Gospels say? He goes off alone by himself to pray. Jesus gives a very clear example that there are times when we are responsible to fulfill responsibilities and obligations, and that is proper and practical in life, but there also must be times that we should challenge ourselves to slow down and settle down. And this is the huge problem with us here in the United States. I was sharing with some folks the other day, a very good friend of mine in France, wasn't feeling well. I forget what the diagnosis was. They get 6 weeks of vacation in France. If you all want to move together, we can. We'll find a place. We'll all live on the same block, They get 6 weeks of vacation in France, and then they get a couple weeks of sick time. So after his time was used up, he went back to the doctor, and the doctor asked him, how are you feeling? How are you healing? And he said, not very well. I'm not feeling well. And the doctor simply wrote a script that he's not supposed to return to work until I give the permission and the go-ahead that he can. And that time, the extra weeks that he was off that he's not entitled to, he actually got paid for. The mentality around socialized medicine and the culture of other countries is very different than us. Here in the United States, we value ourselves based on what we do. We see our value to the extent of which other people are dependent on us to do what it is that we do. That's how we judge ourselves. Sitting around, especially for people who retire early, is really challenging because they have been taught that their title meant all the difference. My dad, executive of Colgate-Palmolive, right? Retires the first year, my father painted anything in our house that was there. Anything and everything. If you stood still long enough in our house, you were getting painted, all right? Because my father had this entire plan that he was going to, and so he had this whole thing. Once all of that stopped, my dad wasn't living in a time and didn't retire in a time where we had a bunch of consultants the way we do now. So you take your expertise, you can work part-time now, and you can consult other companies to reach, greater efficiencies or whatever. For my dad, after that first year, when everything got done painted, and he walked around the house with the paintbrush looking for what was next, my father regrettably had a real hard time coming up and understanding and capturing his identity away from his responsibilities. But that was something that was structured and infused into him. And if you're sitting there thinking it's not infused into you, you're wrong. It's infused to all of us. And when we're in the system, if you will, if this starts sounding too much like the Matrix movies, let me know, I'll move on. But once we're infused into all of that, then we think that the titles make us more valuable. And we end up moving along thinking that we need this title or the next title or the next title. And regrettably, we do this subconsciously. We're not even actively thinking about it. And the fact is, most of the people we hang around with are all thinking the very same way. We have to, as Christians, take a look at this person of Jesus and the way he acted and the way he thinks and what he says really has to make a difference. And we have in this Jesus a person who actively preaches and heals. But have you ever thought to yourself, when Jesus entered a town, he didn't heal everybody. Some people got healed. And then he stops and he leaves. Right? We never think about that part. But when he says to his disciples, let's go on to the next town, that means there's a bunch of people who were waiting for him who never obtained what it was that they were hoping for. And so even in Jesus, we have this understanding that there is a limit to work. But in our society, it's all about work. Now, that is not an excuse not to work, because we all have to work, okay? We all have to work. We all should find something we like. If you can find something you love to do, all the better. But we all have to provide for ourselves. And the goal is that somehow in our work, we're finding meaning and purpose, not value. Meaning and purpose, not value as a human being. Value is already infused in us by the very fact that we are created and we're sitting here. God has already infused that value. We already have spark of divine life inside of us. We're already special. We already are as precious as we will ever be in God's sight. So why aren't we so with ourselves? That's another whole sermon. But the fact is that we cannot be finding value in what we're doing, but meaning and purpose perhaps, for sure. But we also have to take a look at how much are we actually working and not caring for ourselves. How many people do you know who don't go see a doctor, right? They don't take any days off, and they pride themselves on this. Well, I get 20 days off, but I don't use them, right? And people pride themselves on that, even if they lose it. And because the company only gives you, you could only carry over a certain number of days, and you end up losing the rest, and they're prideful about that. But I'm not sure. Who taught us that? Not to say that if there's special circumstances and your company has a need and you want to, that's different. I'm talking about everyday life. A lot of us think and act this way in everyday life, that taking care of ourselves somehow is not important, that we should not be doing that. We should not be looking out for ourselves from a healthy and a mental health perspective. And so we push ourselves to all extremes. And I think in stories like this with Jesus, we see God, the characteristic of the Father, infused and manifested in Jesus, trying to lay out for us what is the goal, what is the balance of being fully human. And it is a mix of work and responsibility, but also of time away and time also with God. And you cannot be doing one more than the other, or else you go off balance and you end up feeling this thing inside you. And you can't put words to it. If I told you how many times people talk about this, they come in there, they'll say, I don't know. I'm just not feeling quite myself. Now, if you followed that question, I'd be on the phone for another hour and a half trying to figure out what yourself is. And you'll ask them, so what is it? Like, tell me about your life. Tell me how you live your life. And in our society, 8 times out of 10, you will find that people are totally off balance. And it's even worse for pastors, because pastors feel that somehow we are meant to drive ourselves to the point of madness, because somehow this is what Jesus did. And the fact is that the scriptures don't show that, but we convince ourselves that as pastors, we have a greater responsibility, and so we're meant to leave it all out there on the field, even though it can in many ways and does hurt us and damage us psychologically or emotionally. You have to, all of us have to take a look at Jesus as the example. The reason I'm saying that is you and I need to be affirmed by something outside of ourselves, that there is a construct by which we should be living our life, and that it is permissible to work and to relax, to work and to find time for prayer. We need something outside of ourselves to tell us this, because we don't believe it. We don't believe telling ourselves. And I can tell you, therapists have shared this with me. We sit there, we tell them exactly what to do. And then ultimately, we know that they don't need the medicine, but if they did this, their life would correct itself. They would be better. They would be healthy. There would be a return of balance. It'll take a little bit of time because they're so out of whack because they've been doing it so long. But once you reverse that, there's some time. They really don't need the Xanax. They don't need the Zoloft or whatever. They don't need any of that. They just need work-life balance. And the problem is they don't. And so they end up getting prescribed medicines. Tell me if you don't know some of these people. Tell me if perhaps we're not those people ourselves. But the fact of the matter is, I think in Jesus and in this story, you see both. You see both. Jesus is affirming both. He understands what Mary is saying, but he's not putting Martha down because of the work that she's doing. He's putting Martha down because he's not recognizing that what Mary is doing is as valuable as what she is doing as providing hospitality. And so this is meant to be the summer. Do you know Sicily basically shuts down in August? There's nothing there. Nobody works. It basically shuts itself down. Some produce comes in, some people sell the produce in the morning, they go fishing in the morning, they come back, it's all said and done. What makes that culture different than ours, except for someone or something or tradition has built that as such? And yet you and I, we continue sort of moving along without asking ourselves the question, is this really all there is to life? Am I missing a component? Am I missing a piece? Why do I feel like this? You feel like this because we're off-center. And we've emphasized one much more than the other. And I think in Jesus we have a very clear example of balance. If God the Father manifested in his Son comes down and lives a certain way, wouldn't we think that that is what it means to be fully human? That the example of Jesus is exactly the model by which you and I should be living to have fulfillment, to have completion, to be balanced, to have happiness and joy in our life? So why is it that we don't look to him? And if we are still caught up in all this, then we should look at him, and he's the one who gives us the permission to find this balance. This is the summer. We're meant to be finding time to relax. We're meant to be finding time to settle down. We're meant to be finding time to spend with family and friends. We're meant to, have those moments where we're trying to get the barbecue to work, that it doesn't want to work, and we don't know why the gas thing doesn't work. And, this is the season for all that type of aggravation that's related to relaxation. This is the season for that. And I'm simply sharing that many of us will skip over this. We'll just skip over it, and we'll think that we're not valuable enough for it, or we don't believe it, we don't buy into it, or somebody else or something else is telling us something different. And I'm saying, as disciples, we can trust that Jesus is the example, and it has all been laid out for us. Our permission comes from our Master. God bless you.